on the road again. First Samuel. First Samuel is an interesting book. The Hebrew name for this book is Shemuel, which is Samuel in Hebrew. But the interesting thing about the book, we're entering a phase here where we go to the first and seconds. First and second Samuel, first and second Kings, and first and second Chronicles.
Bless.
The interesting thing about these 6 books is in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, there's only 3. They call it the book of Samuel, the book of Kings, and the book of Chronicles. They only have one book or one scroll for each one of these. What happened is when they were translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek, the Septuagint, the Greek takes more words to write the same content as Hebrew. So the scrolls were too big. So back in the 200 BC, when they created the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, they split them in 2. They actually split them. It's even different than that. So in the Septuagint, they call these 6 books First Kings, Second Kings, Third Kings, Fourth Kings, and then First Chronicles and Second Chronicles. So they actually don't even have Samuel in the Septuagint. The content is identical. So if you go look at the Septuagint in Greek, in First Samuel, the words and everything are identical to the content meaning, but instead of having it like what we do, so what happened is when the Hebrew had just the 3 books, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, the Septuagint broke them out into 2. When they did it to the English, they went back to the Tanakh, the original Hebrew, and returned it to Samuel, but made it First and Second Samuel instead of First and Second Kings. So just a little bit of trivia there, right? It doesn't mean anything. The content doesn't change. But just understand, if you were talking to some Hebrew people who read the Hebrew Bible, and you said First and Second Samuel, well, if you were talking to someone who knew the Septuagint, the Greek, they would say, what? You mean First and Second Kings? So anyway, just so you know that. So we're going to look at First and Second Samuel today. Of course, Samuel wrote the bulk of the book of Samuel, First Samuel, but he doesn't write any of the second because he actually dies in chapter 25. We're going to see here. And there's 31 chapters here. So no one tells us who wrote the rest of it, but Gad is the prophet of the day, and they think Gad finished out the book of First Samuel after Samuel passed away in chapter 25. The ultimate theme of these books are God's sovereignty. We're going to have a transitioning going on here, and Samuel is transitioning from judges to the monarchy, to the kings, and we're going to kind of see that. The book of Samuel covers 100-year period of time. The one word theme for the book is sovereignty. God's sovereignty under the judges, God's sovereignty under the priests, and God's going to be sovereign under the kings. And we're going to see this transition. And the whole time, though, we're seeing what God uses here on earth, but God's in providence and sovereignty is in control. So much like our lives here, we think we're in control of our life. The world thinks that they're in control of their life, but God's hand of sovereignty is still on this world today. And what God's will is will ultimately come out. So we're going to see that. I've got a couple maps, and I'm going to go from really, really high and narrowing it down. And this one isn't necessarily to show you the timeline, even though it has a timeline in it. Kim has asked me 2 things over the years. She wanted me to teach through the Bible to her in chronological order. And then she's also wanted me to teach. I've got this map in my head where I have all these things in my head and they fit into this picture on this puzzle. And when I get new information, if it breaks my puzzle, I have to go research and say, okay, how's this puzzle get fixed with this new information? And she's wanted me to teach that. And I've always said, someone smarter than me needs to do that. And I want to show you why. So up until now, as we've taught through the Bible, it's been pretty singular in its chronological steps. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, all those are one book. As we get to Samuel and on, the Kings and the Chronicles, we start throwing in all the prophets during the same time period. We're going to step through them one book at a time still, but from your perspective, understand all those other books that we're going to look at later are actually in the same time period as the Judges, as what we're starting right now with Samuel. And then to throw another curveball, you put the books of wisdom, where you got Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs of Solomon. Those get thrown in during the same time period. So it would be very difficult at this point now, if we were to try to teach the chronological, we would be jumping from book to book to book, putting in these new books. It is difficult, and to do it in a way that everybody stays focused and able to continue to build. I like buckets, right? And this breaks all my buckets because it's not clean, definite borders.
This is good, though.
No, yeah, it's busy, right? It's busy with a lot of information. And of course, we're going to be in here. We're entering Samuel and then Kings. It's remember I was saying 353. Now we get to a 500-year period. We're going to be here until the Babylonian captivity for 500 years. And I kind of have, this is the map we looked at last week. And we were, of course, in this light blue period of Judges, which was around 350 years. And now we're going to move into the book of Kings, the United Kingdom at least, for 1st and 2nd Samuel. And this, once again, just shows it in another way. And I put these in there not because we're going to go over them in detail today, but I send them out. You guys will have them. You can study them and take a look. But once again, we're going to start out here. Eli, of course, is the high priest at the time in the cayenne color down there. And then it's going to move into Samuel. And this is the same thing. This is the 100-year period, just showing that Samuel overlaps. Even in Samson, he actually starts out in Samson, and then Eli, the high priest, and then Samuel is born, and then we have the two kings, Saul and David. First Samuel is going to end, and we'll see it when we get to it, pretty abrupt. And the reason it's going to end abrupt is because I told you in the beginning here, it really isn't 2 books. It's just the book of Samuel in the Tanakh. So they would have not stopped there. They would have just kept going on. But for us, the guys who split it in 2 just go, oh, where's a good place to end it? Saul's death. And so it just kind of ends abruptly when we're going through this. So we'll see that. The 3 main characters of our book, of course, is Samuel. It starts out with Samuel in chapters 1 through 8. And then it goes to the focus on Saul, the first king, and then David, of course, the second king, God's choice. So that's kind of these first 3. There's other characters we're going to look at. We're going to start in the very first one with Hannah. Hannah is Samuel's mother. Her husband, Elkanah, is the husband. Eli is the high priest, as we said. Eli has 2 sons. We're going to learn about them, Kophani and Phinehas. They're scoundrels. So we'll look at them. And then the book of Samuel is named after Samuel. He'll be in there. And then we get the Philistines, the enemy. They're in here every other chapter. They're causing problems. They're at war with Israel. We're going to see that. Then we have Saul being anointed by Samuel. Jonathan is his son. David, Goliath. Everybody knows the David and Goliath story. And then David's 2 wives, Michal and Abigail. So these are the characters as we go through these 31 chapters. Okay. There's other players, obviously, too, but the main characters are here. The main characters, of course, are Samuel, Saul, and David. But these are the sub-characters, and then there's even some other, obviously, characters in there. So we start out, that's an introduction. Now we start out in 1 Samuel. We start out with Elkanah. They're making their pilgrimage to Israel, or not to Israel, to the tabernacle. Remember, they do 3 times a year. They have to go to the tabernacle or eventually the temple and make sacrifices, right? That's Passover or unleavened bread, Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's Pentecost, and then it's trumpets. So those 3 feasts, they go back. This is one of them. We don't know which one because the Bible doesn't tell us. It'll tell us other things later. But Elkanah has 2 wives. He's got Hannah and Peninnah. And Peninnah has children. And in chapter 1, she uses that against Hannah. Hannah is distraught. Hannah is not eating. She's moping. And her husband basically in chapter 1 is talking to her and saying, why won't you eat? Why are you moping? She goes, and he basically says in the verses, Am I not better than 10 sons? Because she has no children. That's why she's moping. And she wants a child. So they're making this pilgrimage to Shiloh, where the tabernacle is. Now, I highlighted the Ephraimite. He is from the clan of Ephraimites, from Benjamin. He is from the tribe of Judah, right? So you get the tribe of Judah and in Bethlehem, and then the Ephraimites are that clan. That's the same clan that we talked about last week in Judges. So you see the names, what the names mean. So we basically go to the second half of chapter 1, and we've got the story of Hannah and Eli. So Eli's introduced here. He's the priest. I don't like the artist rendering of this. I know it's a little pet peeve, but they're for people. So the artist knows that this is the story of Hannah and Eli. He drew it, but he's got them sitting at the temple. The temple doesn't exist yet. The temple doesn't get built until Solomon. Solomon's not even born. In fact, David's not even born. They're still in Shiloh in the tabernacle. So while the artist a great story for us to have a picture of Hannah's interaction with Eli, which is good, someone should have said, well, you're building a temple. They're not at the temple. Anyway, so just so you guys know, this is the picture I found. It should be in front of a tabernacle, which, remember, are curtains and tents and all that, not stones. So anyway, so the story in chapter 1 here is Hannah goes there and she's mourning still because she's childless. She's barren. And she's praying, but not verbally. She's just moving her lips. Eli goes to her and says, woman, why are you drunk in this holy place? Leave, go home and get drunk, And she goes, no, my Lord, I'm not drunk. She goes, I'm brokenhearted to the Lord and I'm praying to the Lord for a child. And so he interacts with her and Eli says, okay. He prays over her, blesses her, and says, ask God to give her a child. So that lifts her spirits. So she actually goes back home, and her husband immediately realizes there's a difference. She's got a spring to her step. She's eating again. They go back home to Bethlehem. They have relations, and she gets pregnant. So now she has a child. Back up, she actually dedicated the child. She, in the temple, or the tabernacle at the time, she made a promise to God that if God would give her a child, she'll dedicate him back to the Lord. That's a Nazarene. I'll never cut his hair. He'll be totally dedicated for life to the Lord. So that's that story there. And then in chapter 2, we go to chapter 2 where she's pregnant. She sings this song. And the first half of chapter 2 is Hannah's song. And it's constant and just praising and uplifting to God. It is an amazing song that just gives praise and worship to God. They parallel this song here that Hannah's singing to the same song that Mary sings. When Mary goes to Elizabeth and she's pregnant, and John the Baptist, flips in Martha's stomach, and Mary sings the song. I forgot what they called it. I think I wrote it down. So anyway, it's Mary's song, and so these two songs parallel Mary's song of the birth of Jesus and Hannah's song of the birth of Samuel. And if we were going to stay and camp out here for a while, we can show parallels of a foreshadowing of Hannah's child of Samuel, who's delivered to Israel to save Israel, parallels Mary's child Jesus, who's delivered to the world to save us, to save the world. So the second half of chapter 2 takes a turn. We're introduced to two more people, Eli's sons. And the Bible literally says they're scoundrels. I used that word a minute ago, but that's because the Bible uses it. He goes, Eli's sons were scoundrels. They were assigned by Eli to work the temple or the tabernacle, and they were taking bribes. They were eating and taking the choice of the sacrifices that were supposed to go to God, but they were taking them for themselves. The priests did get parts of that sacrifice, right? Remember when we went through Leviticus, there were chunks of it that went to God, and there were different portions of it that went to the priest, so the priest could eat the consecrated bread and also the sacrifice. But they were taking the choice meat that was supposed to go to God. And worse, they were sitting outside the tabernacle and they were having sexual relations with the women who were working in the tabernacle area. So that they were just not good. They did not follow in the way of Eli. the man comes, we're not told the name of the man, and he prophesies to Eli. And he basically tells him, your two sons are not going to continue, and your lineage will not, in fact. Your lineage will not continue to serve in the temple anymore. Then we have the story of Samuel. Remember, Samuel was Hannah's son. He's born. She kept him and weaned him. And that at an age, we don't know if that age is 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever the age is, where she finally released him as her promise, as her oath, to the temple. So now he's serving in the tabernacle under Eli, the high priest. And he's sleeping, and God calls Samuel and says, Samuel. And Samuel wakes up and he runs to Eli and says, yes, my Lord. And Eli goes, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And so he goes back to bed, and God calls Samuel again. Eli, Samuel. And he wakes up again, and he goes to Eli's bedroom again. This happens 3 times. And Eli says, I didn't call you. The 3rd time it happens, Eli goes, this is from the Lord. He goes, the next time you hear God call your name, Samuel, answer, say, your servant is here. It actually says, Samuel said, speak, your servant is listening. So that's what Samuel says the next time God calls him. And then God gives Samuel a prophecy. So remember, Samuel is a judge. We're going to see him act as a judge. He has, as a child, he's used as a prophet, and he's going to be used as a priest. So he's a judge, prophet, and priest to the Lord. In this case, he has a prophecy. He wakes up the next day after he's given the prophecy. Of course, old Eli wants to know, what did God say? And he goes back and forth about him trying to get Samuel to tell him, what was this prophecy? And he was a little reluctant because the prophecy was not good. But he tells him, he goes, God said that your 2 sons will die on the same day as a sign of judgment that, they have done wrong in the temple, in the tabernacle. So basically Eli says, let Lord do what the Lord's going to do. So, but he gets bad news from, this is confirmation, because remember the last chapter, a man gave a very similar prophecy. Now God told Samuel, and then Samuel reiterates this prophecy to Eli. So it's the second time Eli's heard a very similar prophecy. So chapter 4 begins, and we're going to see this as we step through Samuel. We're going to see the Philistines attacking, and the battle's going on, and then something happens that stops it, and then another 2 chapters they attack again. This is the first time in the book of Samuel where the Philistines attack, and Israel loses 4,000 people. The other thing I want to point out, in this book, we're going to see on these characters that I showed you, certain characters are going to constantly be going to God and saying, God, what do you say to me? Whenever they go to God, good results occur from that conversation. Whenever Israel and or their leaders do not go to God, bad things. And it's kind of like the Judges too. In fact, it's the whole darn Bible that we've been going through. Every time they go to God, God tells them how to be victorious, and they're victorious. Every time they don't go to God because they think they can handle it on their own, catastrophe occurs. And this is the same way. Remember, I've said, well, we have whys in our road, and we're constantly getting into these whys, and we have a choice. We can pray to God and ask him to guide us on which direction to go, or we can look at the evidence and assume we know what we're doing and pick our own choice. That's the same with Israel. Israel has a choice when they get to a situation. Most of them are battles, and for us, we may not be fighting Philistines, but we have battles in life. Do we take those battles on by ourselves, or do we go to God in prayer and say, God, how do you want me to handle this situation? And we make the same mistakes. Sometimes we just think we know what we're doing. We do it, and it doesn't always turn out right. So this is what happens. They did not go to God before they went into battle. They went into battle, and 4,000 people died. So they said, we can't win this war. They retreated. They said, let's send for the tabernacle, because history showed them whenever they march out with with the Ark of the Covenant, with the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. Whenever we march out with the Ark, we win. Well, we just went over what kind of priests were handling the tabernacle, right? The 2 scoundrels. So basically they send for the Ark comes, they go into battle again with the Ark. And what happens? The Philistines kill 30,000, not just 4. They kill 30,000, and both of Eli's sons die that day. So they die in this battle. A messenger goes back and tells Eli, he's 98 at the time. When he hears the message that both of his sons died, he falls off his chair and breaks his neck and he dies. So this day, Eli is judged because he let his sons get away with what they did. And the 2 sons were judged because of what they did. And the tabernacle, or the ark is captured by the Philistines. So the Philistines now have the Ark of the Covenant. Israel no longer has the Ark. And this chapters 5 and 6 go around with the top potato. You know, I got a map. Remember, I say it's in Shiloh. That starts out there. The tabernacle is in Shiloh, up in the top right corner, and they call for the ark to be delivered. So they delivered over into the Philistine territory where the battle is going on. And in Nebuchadnezzar's, where that battle occurred, they end up capturing the ark, and they take it down to Ashdod. So Ashdod has a temple to their goddess, their god Dagon. And Dagon is this half man, half fish god. He actually is one of the highest gods in the Philistine civilization. It doesn't come from Philistine. It actually goes all the way back to Babel in Mesopotamia. But they have adopted this god, and it becomes one of their most popular gods. And they got this temple. They put the ark in this temple of Dagon. Dagon ends up the next day falling down, the Bible says, in prostrate on its face towards the ark. And so they think it's weird. They lift it back up. They come in the next day. It's down and face first in front of the ark again. So they put it up a second time. The third time, it's down and decapitated and its arms are off. So, because it's in the presence of the ark, God will not share his glory with anyone, right? So he basically destroyed, decapitated, and de-armed their God. But he also brought judgment on the Philistines. At the same time this was going on, he brought boils and tumors and pestilence to them. So they basically say, we don't want this. They send it to the next town, Gath. Same thing's happening. They're getting plagues and stuff. So they send it to Ekron. Same thing. So they call in their high priests, their priests and their seers, and say, what do we got to do? And the priests say, you got to give the ark back to Israel. This is the cause of it. And they say, don't give it back empty-handed either. What do we give it back to? So there's this whole scenario of the Philistine priests saying, melt gold into these five frogs and 5 tumors. I don't know how they knew what a tumor looked like, but they melted them in a tumor of gold and frogs, gold, and gave them back to Israel. So they basically give the ark back and a bunch of gold.
With interest.
Huh?
Yeah, with interest.
With interest, right. It's the shades of them. Tuma, yeah, that's a tuma. Anyway, so Israel finally gets the ark back. So God wins that victory, right, giving them the ark back. They didn't do that. So so this gets us the ark comes back to them, and it's chapter 7. Israel repented. They get the ark back, so they repented, but the Philistines are going to attack them. This sounds like this is happening the next day. It's not. They get the ark back, and it's actually chapter 7 talks about a 20-year period where Samuel ruled over them for 20 years. But in this 20-year period, the Philistines do attack. We're not told exactly, is it 1 year into it, 2 years into it? They've got the ark back. They praise God. They repented. But then the Philistines all of a sudden attack again. Samuel intercedes for them, and God actually sends, much like the scene that we saw at Mount Sinai, where God speaks and the thunder roars and it gets louder and louder and louder and the people are all petrified. Here, the Philistines are going to attack Israel, and Israel's not ready to defeat them. And then God speaks and thunder comes out and lightning, and each man scatters in different directions, and the Philistines finally chase them down and are victorious over the Philistines here, because they're thrown into confusion. So, and then basically God grants Samuel this 20-year of peace, where he rules under it. Towards the end of this, we're all of a sudden at a period now where we're going to see 8, 9, and 10 about kings. This is going to enter Saul here. So in chapter 8, when Samuel, goes back to much like Eli. Eli was the high priest and he was good, but his sons were bad. And God judged Eli and his two sons. Now we've got Samuel. Samuel is good. Samuel is, like I say, a prophet, a priest, and a judge. But his sons, he has two sons, right? And he has the same problem Eli has. He goes, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as leaders over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second son was Abijah. And they served at Beersheba. But the sons did not follow his ways, much like Eli, right? The sons didn't follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So it doesn't say they were quite as bad as Eli's two sons, but they were bad, right? They were not serving in the way of the tabernacle and God's laws.
Those preacher kids, you just can't trust them.
I was going to say that too. I was like, I'm going to say something about PKs, but what if I have a PK on my class? I better not say that. But you're right. Sometimes I know a number of kids that were raised, in fact, two of my cousins, and one of them went the way their dad did, dedicated to the Lord, and the other went completely in the opposite direction. So you never know. So all the elders, so this is what happens because of Samuel's lack of attention to his family. And this is a warning to all of us as well, right? We need to dedicate our lives to the Lord and be sanctified and be used however God wants to use us, but not at the cost of ignoring our family, right? Because even if you are doing godly things, but not attending to your family, and your family goes astray, in these two examples, God judged him for it too. Now, obviously, we're under a different covenant, but still, God dealt with things in the Old Testament so that the poison would not spread any further. And with Eli's son, if Eli would have died and his two sons would have continued without God's judgment, those two sons would have totally corrupted Israel. Same thing with Eli now. Samuel now. With Samuel, he's getting old, and in this case, what it causes stumbling of the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel, because they see the way his two sons are handling it, and they know he's old and not going to continue to judge them and be ruler over them, they want to be rulers. Now they're looking at God's way of judgment. They're under God's way of judgment with this prophet and this judge, Samuel. And they're looking at all their neighbors, all the nations around them, and they do it completely different. They got a king, and they say, we want to be like all the other nations. We want a king too. So this is a failure on Samuel's part, his two sons' part, and the nation of Israel's part. Everybody in this party, in this covenant here that they're going to make, go the wrong direction. Instead of looking to God and say, God, how do you want us to handle this situation with these two judges and priests that are going the wrong way? They take it upon themselves that we want to be like the world. We want to be like everybody else. That's a very good message for us not to do, right? Is we should not do that either. Just because the world temporarily looks like things are rosy, God's ways are always better than the world's ways, no matter what it looks like from the outside. Facebook's horrible, right? When you look at someone on Facebook, all you see is the good stuff. No one posts the horrible things that are the underbelly of stuff that's going on in the world that they're facing. We only put our best foot forward on Facebook. So you think, well, they're all having a great time. They're all doing it. Well, maybe, but you don't know what the miseries are underneath. Anyway.
They should rename Facebook to Look at Me.
Yeah, exactly. Look at me. Yep.
Look at me.
It's all, yeah.
Selfies there.
Yeah, Facebook, yeah.
So their mistake is they want a king. So God says, okay, you want a king? I'm going to give you a king. And there's this chapter 9 is all about this weird way where God sends Samuel out, and Saul at the same time is sent out by his father to look for his missing donkeys. And God's providence brings these two together. Now, there's a whole lesson in here if we stopped for a while, because as you can see, Saul is not even for the tribe of Judah, right? And we know from the promise when Jacob was blessing his 12 sons, he says the scepter will never leave from Judah. So the king, the prophecy that was made by Israel or Jacob to Judah was that his lineage would carry the kingly lineage forever. Now, they don't have a king yet, right? And that kingly lineage that God promised through the prophecy of Jacob was the Messiah, not David. David is a foreshadowing of that, and Saul is definitely not a fulfillment of that, right? Everything is wrong biblically about Saul, but everything is right visually about Saul. He's head and shoulders taller than everybody. He's handsome.
Warrior.
He's strong. He's a warrior. Yeah, he looks the part of a king. If you were going to pick a king, he would be the guy that you would pick if you were of the world. And so that's who God gives him. And Samuel anoints him. And Saul starts out okay here. He answers and said, "But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? Why is the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe of all the 12? Anybody remember? We covered that in Judges. Remember the rape thing where they raped a Levite concubine, and it was the first civil war. Remember in Judges, I probably went over too fast. They raped him, and a Levite went to the council and said, "Hey, they raped him." They judged Benjamin and said, "Give us the guilty people." The tribe of Benjamin protected the guilty people and would not give them. So a war broke out, and they killed all the Benjamites except for 600 men. And they made an oath at that time, if you remember, we're not going to let any of our daughters mate with it, marry them. So then they had second thoughts, and they said, "Oops, that'll completely wipe out the tribe of Benjamin. We can't do that. We can't have Benjamin completely disappear." So they looked for a loophole. They found that loophole when they get a census where there was a group of the tribes that did not come to that and did not make that oath. So they had those Benjamite men kidnap the women when they went to their water. Remember that? And that's how the Benjamite tribe survived back in Judges. But now they're here, and they're the smallest of tribes. They're the smallest of tribes because of the Civil War.
So we're Israelite women.
They were Israelite women. Yeah, they had to marry Israelite women, right? They were Israelite women from a clan of a tribe that did not make the oath because they could not have been the ones that made the oath. But yeah. So anyway, so Saul starts out okay, but he basically says, I'm not only from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe of the 12, but I'm from the smallest clan of the tribe of Benjamin. So he's humble, right, at this time, but that changes, unfortunately. So then 10 is all about Samuel. Now he gathered all the tribes. So all the tribes come, and he takes oil and he publicly anoints Saul as the king. And I want you to look at this, and once again, we could probably camp out here a little longer too. But in verse 10 here, it says, "When he and his servants arrived at Gilboa, a procession of prophets met him. The Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he joined in their prophesying." So they were prophesying and praising, and then God had his Spirit come upon Saul, and he prophesied. So God accepted Saul, anointed Saul, and even gifted him with this ability, this special ability. But I put chapter 16 in here because just 6 chapters later, we're going to see, now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul. Now, a lot of people say, okay, what's going on here? And there's this whole debate on, did Saul lose his salvation? Was Saul really ever saved? And we don't have time to really talk about that enough. It's a good extra credit study that you guys can do. But I'll tell you this. The Old Testament did not have the blessings of the New Testament. The New Covenant, we are promised that when you believe, the Holy Spirit comes in you and seals you as a deposit, guaranteeing your inheritance. That promise wasn't made to Adam and Eve. That promise wasn't made to the judges. That promise wasn't made to the nation of Israel. That is a unique promise to God's bride, the church, that you're sealed as a promise, guaranteeing. God, remember in the Old Testament, Samson. God came on him, gave him power. He was a scoundrel too. His whole life, God departed from him. But when he was in captivity of the Philistines, he prayed at the end of his life, and God came back upon him, and he killed more Philistines in his death than he did his whole life. And Samson's in the hero of faith in Hebrews. So we know, we studied the character of Samson. It was awful. It was awful from almost the conception. His parents were faithful and they dedicated him, but he was basically one time after another making mistake after mistake, but God still used him in the end of his life, and he's accounted as the heroes in faith. So that's a great promise to us. So God is loving and merciful, even though he doesn't seal them. He comes upon them and then leaves them. We are so blessed to live in the time that we live, because once you receive God, no one can snatch you from his hands, you know. So anyway,
That's one little letter makes the difference. Old Testament, the Spirit came on them, and New Testament, by grace,
It is.
we're sealed with the Holy Spirit in.
yeah, very true, very true. Yeah, we take that for granted too many times. We forget we've got a friend. I mean, God calls us a friend, you know, companion. So
But also, didn't Isaiah, he says, Lord, your name is written on the palm of his hands. I mean, what kind of seal is that then? Maybe
Well,
talk to that.
I think so. Like I said,
this is awesome.
no, that's fine. If we were going to camp out here, we would go and talk about Abraham being saved by faith, right? So everybody is still saved by faith through grace. The difference is the relationship, the walking relationship with God. We live in a different covenant
Right.
than they did. And their covenant was that God, if you followed the law, God would bless you. If you did not follow the law, God would curse you. That's not a good judgment. I mean, that's not a good way to live. I mean, we would be cursed constantly because we stumble and fail constantly. But they were still, I mean, if you look through Hebrews and the Hall of Faith, we would not pick the people that God puts in there, because we say, well, but they did bad. I mean, King David's in there. He's going to murder. He's going to commit adultery. So God still saved them by faith because they had faith in God. But if we were going to, like I say, go deeper into this, there's a salvation issue and there's a relationship issue. And it's the relationship issue, not the salvation issue, that makes a difference, right? They're still saved by faith through grace. God saves those who believe in God. And so that's what he does now. God saves in the new covenant those who believe in God. But we even get more than just salvation. We get Christ in us, which is the difference between only selected people in the Old Testament got God in them, his Spirit in them. And it was only temporary. So anyway, it's a very good story to show how blessed we are to be living in the relationship that we live in with God. So this one, remember this story here. Remember back when Moses, before they were going to enter the promised land, they were on the east side of the Jordan, and two tribes, the tribe of Reuben and Gad, said to ask Moses, can we take this highlands here on the east side? He goes, you can have it if you come and fight with your brothers across the Jordan and battle. When we're done, you can go back there. They did. That was never God's plan, but they wanted it. Moses allowed it, and he took it. It's going to bite them right now. So basically, remember the Ammonites are Lot's from the youngest daughter. They're descendants of Lot's from that whole thing of incest from his second daughter, the Ammonites. And that's who all of a sudden is attacking the two tribes. So the Ammonites are attacking both Reuben and Gad. And it's this weird story where this king of the Ammonites, they want to make a treaty because they know they can't beat them. So they say, we want to make a treaty. And he goes, I tell you what, you can make a treaty on one condition: if you gouge out your right eye. Everybody has to gouge out their right eye. I read some stuff on this. I guess this king, not biblically, but historically, did that. I mean, he did that with other armies. Well, they gouge out her eye. They said, give us 7 days. So he said, okay, I'll give you 7 days to make a decision. They sent someone to Saul saying, hey, help, we're being attacked. Saul does another weird thing where he cuts up a cow and sends it, disperses it to the other 11 tribes, or the 10 tribes in this case. And he says, what's going on? Come fight for your brothers. And if you don't, it will be like this cow where I will divide all your land and all your cattle amongst everybody else, whoever doesn't come. So everybody comes, they go over and they're victorious and they beat the Ammonite king, and save the two tribes, and they don't have to gash their eyes out. So it's kind of a story here, about Saul actually doing the right thing again, right? Even though the way he did it was a little weird, he should have just called. But anyway, so he had to use a little threat. You always see with Saul a little bit of right, but a lot of human effort, right? I mean, he felt he needed to threaten them in order to get, he could have said, God calls us to go and save, the win this battle, and they would have come too. 12 is Samuel gives his farewell speech. That doesn't mean Samuel dies here, but he gives this farewell speech. And all of chapter 12 is about him. First off, because of Eli's sons and because of his two sons, he's been basically telling them, look, I never lied to you guys. I never stole from the tabernacle. I never stole from God. I always judged, justly. And he's basically upholding his integrity. And then he goes into a recount on 6 through 11 about everything God's done for them, all the way back to Egypt, when he delivers them from Egypt, protected them through the wilderness and all that. And then he goes to them and he basically scolds them for choosing a king. That basically here he tells them, this is not God's will, this is your will. You want a king. It's not God's will. And then he goes and he sets up a covenant condition with them, and it really just reiterates the covenant with the nation of Israel, where now you're going to be under a king, but if you and your king do not follow the law, I will curse you. If you and your king follow the law, you will be blessed. So once again, if you seek my will and follow my commands, I will protect you and bless you. If you do not, I will not protect you and bless you. Samuel calls for a sign. The sign is this. Now this we're told when this is happening. Remember, we didn't know what pilgrimage Samuel's mom and dad made, but this time it's during the wheat harvest. So he asked for a sign, and he basically says the sign is, I'm going to pray for a thunderstorm. And Samuel prays for a thunderstorm, and it's during the wheat harvest. The wheat harvest is Pentecost. That's when the wheat harvest begins. Pentecost is late spring, early summer, and it's a drought season. And so it's very unusual to have rain at all, let alone a big thunderstorm. He prays for a thunderstorm, and immediately God sends a thunderstorm. So it's during a drought, and it's right when he prays. And that's a sign that this seal or covenant that Samuel just had them make is from God. Of course, the people repent and accept it. And then Samuel assures the people but warns them. So he also here, they're getting their king, and he tells them, though, and I can't remember if this was right before that, but he basically tells them that do you really want a king? Here's what a king's going to do for you. He's going to take your daughters as servants. He's going to take your sons as soldiers. He's going to tax you guys, put burdens on you guys. Do you really want a king? And they basically still accept and say, we want a king. So he tries to talk them out of it, but they do not. I call this the 3 mistakes of Saul. So Saul's their king now. Saul is ruling over them. We went from a single leader with Moses, and then a single leader with Joshua, and then we went into the judges, where every region had their own judge, and they were all each man did what was right in their own eyes. Now should be God, but it's back to a single leader now, a monarch. So we got Saul, and he's leading the nation of Israel. His first mistake is they were going to go into battle in chapter 13, and Samuel was going to come there and do a sacrifice to them before they did. Samuel was delayed. Saul got impatient, and Saul did the sacrifice himself. It was not Saul's job to do it. Then once again, this shows that half-heartedness of Saul, right? Saul is going to lead the people into battle. He knew that they should sacrifice to God and go to God before going into battle, because they've seen it doesn't work out good when they don't. But it's Samuel's responsibility to do that sacrifice. And because he was delayed, he got impatient. This is kind of Saul's Ishmael, right? Abraham and Sarah got impatient, couldn't wait on God, took matters into their own hands. and they had Hagar and Ishmael, which we know all the problems from that. Well, this is going to cause them problems too. Saul does the sacrifice. Samuel gets there and he's furious. He rebukes Saul and basically tells him, your kingdom will not endure. Because of Saul's Ishmael, he will not get. And God knew he was going to fail because he was never intended. He's a Benjamite. He's not from the tribe of Judah. He should have never been in that place, but he is. And there's a whole bunch of good parallels here or foreshadowings of man's effort versus God's effort. Us trying to do things in our own strength versus waiting on God to do things in his strength. Saul failed that exercise every single time. The second time he fails it isn't his impatientness, it's his rashness. They're doing battle with the Philistines in chapter 14. His son Jonathan is off winning battles. Saul makes an oath to everybody. No one can eat, okay, until we win this battle today. No one can eat at all today. And Jonathan comes back from a victory. He wasn't there when this oath was made. He uses a spear to go in. There's a honeycomb. He goes in with a spear, dips honey, and eats it. When Saul heard this, Saul said, we're going to stone you. You know, this is his son. He wasn't there, but he's going to stone him. His men say, no, don't. And they talk Saul out of stoning his son because his son broke his oath that he made. In reality, Saul should have never made a rash oath like that. God didn't ask him to do it. Once again, Saul does something on his own wisdom, his own strength. Constantly, we can see examples of what not to do under Saul. And we're going to see examples under David, God's choice of what to do, but that comes later. Saul is our bad example. David will be a good example, even though he's human and he's going to do a lot of mistakes as well. 15 is Saul's third mistake. God tells him to go in there and to have victory and to kill everybody. He says to kill all the livestock, men, women, and children, everybody there. Saul does not do that. Saul does not kill the king, and he keeps all the finest livestock. And he tells Saul it's because we're going to sacrifice it to the Lord. And this is where we get that statement where better to obey than to sacrifice. You know, that's where that comes from. Samuel basically tells Saul, look, God told you to kill him. God didn't tell you that he wanted this livestock as sacrifices. You know, he said to destroy them, to destroy the livestock, and you kept it. We don't know, and we're not told Saul's real motivation in keeping this stuff, but when he's addressed to it by Samuel, he basically says, well, I kept it to sacrifice to the Lord. You know, sometimes we probably do that too, right? We do something, and we say, well, I'm going to do it for the Lord, you know, and if I say I'm going to do it for the Lord, then I'm okay.
What is it better to ask for forgiveness than
Than
approval
permission?
or permission? Yeah. How many times I've said that? I'm like,
Yep, I've said that.
Yeah.
That's true. So now, so those are Saul's three mistakes. Because of his mistakes, God judges him and his family, and they will not endure. They will also be. So now we get, gosh, I got her seat up. Now we get to the story of David. Everybody knows. So Samuel goes to Jesse, the house of Jesse. He gets his brothers, and God tells him to go to him and find out which one's going to be king. None of them are king. He goes to Jesse. Don't you have another son? He goes, well, I do. This run out watching our sheep. He goes, I'll wait. He goes, gets David, and David is the one that he blesses. David's a younger boy at this time. We don't know what the age is, but he anoints him as king. He anoints him as king, but he's like, I don't know, 10 or 12 years before he's actually going to become king. So he's anointed way before it. Then we know he's still living with his father, but he's going back and forth to the king as well, because there's stories of him singing music to Saul and stuff. But we have the story where his father sends him because his brothers are in the army of the king, and they're fighting the Philistines. And this is where we get Goliath, right? Goliath is out there taunting the army. He's taunting them, saying, send your best person. Who is your God? And he's taunting God and the nation of Israel. David gets there with supplies that he's taken his brothers, and he goes, what's going on here? And there's this tout with him and his brothers because they think he's, too pushy. And he basically says, why has no one come and defeated this, I forgot what the word he used, but turkey.
yeah.
But and they all, and he goes, I'll do it. And they go, well, how can you do it? And he gives examples. Hey, I watch the sheep, And when the lion came, God gave me the power to overpower the lion. And when the bear came, I was able to overpower the bear. I can overpower, God can overpower this Philistine. David does not look at Goliath. David looks at God and says, he's insulting God, not me, not you. And so he goes out there in the story. Of course, he takes 5 rocks from the river, and there's this whole, why 5 rocks? Because he only needs 1. And there's a fable or a story where Goliath had 4 brothers. That's not in the Bible. That's not even in history. It's just, I think a preacher must have said that one time, and it's just went on and on. I love the story though. It sounds great. You know, he has 4 other rocks for his brothers, but he takes these 5 rocks, puts them in his pouch, and of course we know the story. He kills Goliath. He has nothing but his sling, so he goes and takes Goliath's sword, cuts off Goliath's head, and when he does that, the Philistines disperse. The army of Saul, of Israel, pursue them, and they have victory over that. We move on. We could probably spend an hour in this story.
You did good on winging by all that. Let's keep going.
Yeah, there's a lot, and that's a great story, right? That's one of my favorite stories. Then you have, of course, Jonathan and David's relationship, and they get more and more. They make a covenant to one another to protect each other. They're both generals in Saul's army. They both are credited with going on campaigns and coming back with victory, and Saul too. But of course, we have the thing where Saul kills his thousands and David kills his 10,000s. That causes its friction, and Saul starts getting jealous. Now we're going to go through all of these chapters of iteration after iteration after iteration of Saul trying to kill David. I forgot to tell you, before he killed Goliath, Saul had offered, whoever kills Goliath can have my daughter in marriage, can have this money, this wealth that he had offered, and never pay taxes for the rest of your life, which is interesting, which means they taxed people. So that's there. So he wasn't going to pay tax. David does it, so David gets that, except for Saul reneges on his oldest daughter's hand in marriage. He gives it to another man. But his second daughter, Michal, is given to David. So David now has his first wife, Michal, and she loves him. But we're going to see she also sways a little with the world. But Saul's trying to kill David. She warns her husband, David. And so David flees. Saul gets mad at his daughter for betraying him and stuff. But David flees now. At this point, David is on the outs, constantly on the outs. Saul's pursuing him. His son Jonathan and David are very, very close. And Jonathan doesn't really believe that his dad's going to kill him. He knows he's jealous and stuff, but he doesn't think he's going to kill him. He talks to him at dinner. There's this dinner arrangement. David does not show up and was supposed to be there. Saul basically tells John, I'm going to kill him. So Jonathan and David had this scheme set up that if the next day I come out and I shoot my arrow and I tell my lad who's collecting my arrows, it's beyond you, that's a sign that, yes, my father's going to kill you. Do not come in. And that's what happens. That's what 620 is all about. And so David flees, and he flees with not with no weapon, no supplies. So he gets to Nod. Nod, remember, they were already chanting this song that David kills his 10,000. So everybody thinks he's under the authority of the king still, right? He goes to Nod and he wants to feed his men and himself. And this is a story where all the priest had was consecrated bread. And that consecrated bread is supposed to be for the priest. But it's the whole story, well, if someone's hungry, they can eat the consecrated bread. He gives David and his men the consecrated bread. David also wants a weapon. He goes, well, the only weapon we have is Goliath's sword. So David takes Goliath's sword. So David's got Goliath's sword, and it unfortunately, the next chapter, Saul gets to Nod and realizes what he did, and he kills the priest. The priest did not know that Saul was after him, right? But so Saul kills Amalek, the priest at Nod, for helping David. Then there's a story in 23, and I apologize, I'm gonna have to step it up a little. This town gets attacked. David, once again, what does David do? The difference between Saul and David? David seeks what God's will is. The first thing he does, David seeks God's will. God says, yes, go save them. So he basically goes, at the same time Saul's pursuing him, and he goes and frees this town that was attacked. And then 24 is the first time the chapter talks about Saul is pursuing David. David and his men are in a cave. Saul goes to relieve himself in that cave. They're so close to him that David cuts off the corner of his clothing, and then Saul leaves the cave. And David says, "Look, I could have killed you. I could have taken your life, but I did not. You're God's anointed one." And the story we could talk about here on how much respect David does for God's word. God does not go against, or sorry, David does not go against God, even to kill the person who's trying to kill him, because he knows that God anointed Saul as the king. And basically his men want him to kill him. And he's saying, look, when the time is right, God will take care of that. God will deal with him. I cannot touch the man of God, the man who God ordained. So even as bad as he was, David constantly gives us examples of the right way to live our life. And Saul, of course, constantly gives us the example not to. Then there's this story in 25. It's a very interesting story where David and his men are fleeing. They want food. This man here, Nabal, he's a rich man. He's also from the tribe of Judah, and he's wealthy. And David says, give us supplies, please. Give us water and food. He says, no, I'm not going to help you at all. I'm not going to give you anything. So David basically says, okay, man, strap on your swords. We're going to go take what we need, And Nabal's wife, Abigail, who they describe as wisdom, full of wisdom, goes and gets dry figs, goes and gets bread, goes and gets water, meets David and gives it to him. He blesses her, sends her back. She's going to tell her husband, but he's having a feast for himself and he's drunk. So she waits till the next day. She tells him, he's furious. 7 days later, he dies. David hears he dies. He sends word to get her. David gets a second wife. David marries Abigail because of what she did for him and his men. So he has a second wife now. Once again, not necessarily what God told him to do, but he does it because this is what kings do, right? They marry for that. 26 talks about the second time David goes into Saul's camp. Saul's in the middle with all the people around him. They go and they take Saul's spear and water, showing Saul they could have taken his life, but they didn't. David does this a couple times. 27 is a very interesting story where David's still fleeing, right? So he goes to the king here, this king of the Philistines, and he basically says, I will fight your enemy for you. It's a ruse, though. It's not real. So this king and David hit it off well. This king gives David a whole town. His men and himself gives the whole town. And David is going off and having battles, and he's killing these enemies and bringing the spoils back. So his wealth and his men's wealth is growing and growing. And the king sees that, and the king thinks he's killing all the king's enemies. What David's really doing is killing Israel's enemies. So he's going out there under the umbrella of the Philistine enemy and killing other enemies of Israel. So he's still doing God's work even under this interesting story. And then the next, 28, yeah, we get to 28. And 28, remember, Saul doesn't have Samuel anymore. Saul doesn't have God speaking to him anymore. Saul is kind of lost. And he's so desperate. There's a story that we didn't get to because it was the detail, where Saul had all the seers and all the witches killed. Anybody who fortune telling, he had him killed earlier. Now he wants one because God's not speaking to him and the prophet's not speaking to him. So he has his men, and they find this witch of Endor, or this medium of Endor. And he comes to her under disguise because, of course, he kills anybody that practices this. But he wants her to bring Saul back, or Samuel back to life, and tell him, give him guidance. When he does that, she recognizes. She gets scared, and he says, no, do this for me, and I will not harm you. She does. God allows Samuel, who's dead, to come back and talk to Saul. Very weird, spiritual, a lot of innuendo that we can go into on the separation of the dead and the living. But he allows Samuel to go and talk to Saul. And basically Samuel gives him no counsel, no, you're going to die, basically, right? So that gets us into 29. 29, oh, yes. So you remember the king that had a good relationship with David. David's going to go off and attack Israel this time. And David's in the back of the army. And all the other generals said to the king, we don't want David, the Israelite, fighting behind us in attacking. He could turn on us, and he probably would have. And so they say, don't let him go. So the king takes his general's advice, and he sends David and his army away. At the same time, Ziklag is where the town that the king had given David and his men was raided, and all their women, David's 2 wives, Abigail and his other wife, was taken, and all their families of his 600 men, right, were living there with him. All the families were taken. So they come back and find they're going to stone David. And David said, no. He prays to God, and they go after the army that took all their kin, and they come upon an Egyptian who's dying, and they help him. And basically the Egyptian said, they left me behind because I was sick. And they go, well, we'll spare your life if you tell us where they go, where their spots are. So he leads them to them. They catch up with them, and they end up getting all their people back. It's a battle that David wins and his men win, and they get all their gold and all the rest of the gold that the army had as well.
What question?
Yes.
What I wonder from the previous slide is that, is it really a summer spirit, or is it like a big spirit dressed at summer? What do you know about that? That's what I wonder. Like,
Yeah.
okay, with whom he was really talking, because it was not.
You're not alone. It's a lot of debate on was it, because obviously today, if you're talking to someone from the dead, you're talking to a demon. We pretty much know God's not going to allow the dead to talk to us. It's a demon in masquerade. So we know that today. And there's other scripture that clearly show that too. So God does not allow the dead. There's 2 sides to this. Some think it's exactly that, a demon masquerading as Samuel talking to Saul. But the advice that the Spirit gives is godly. It is not comforting. It's not what you would think from a demon. So others say, no, God, in his providence, allowed this communication to go on where it doesn't normally go on. Now, there's precedent for when Jesus was in transfiguration. Moses and Elijah, right, appeared. Moses and Elijah are dead. But God supernaturally allowed Moses and Elijah to fellowship with Jesus, at the transfiguration, the scene of the transfiguration. So
maybe it was through an angel who was the portal between that appeared like it was Samuel, but who knows? There's a technicality aspect that we just don't know.
And that's the problem, is people have a technicality with this. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
to answer your question, the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us. In the reading of it, it sounds like it is Samuel. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
In the reading of it. This would be a debate that we would talk about for a long time. And we would have pros and cons on could have been, no, it couldn't because of this. But the Bible doesn't tell us explicitly. So when the Bible doesn't explicitly tell me something, I leave that in my little compartment over here to see something. I'm going to ask God when I'm there. I'm like, okay.
But the bottom line too is that today's world, you should not.
In today's world, you definitely should not. I mean, the law clearly shows that they should be put to death. That is card reading, mediums, witchcraft, all of that stuff is
Spirit
satanic.
guides.
All of that, spirit guides, all of that is satanic. The last chapter here, we have the death of Saul, okay? Like I said, this ends abruptly. He's in battle, and his 2 sons die in this battle. Or maybe 3. I think he has 3 sons. All 3 of his sons die, and he gets wounded. He wants his armor bearer to kill him because he didn't want the enemy to get there and, keep him alive, torture him, and make fun of him and all that. So his armor bearer would not kill him, though. So he ends up falling on his own sword, killing himself, and he dies. And that's the end of the book. That's how Samuel ends. Now, chapter 1 is really chapter 32 of the next book, but it kind of ends abruptly like that. I had some comparisons. Hannah and Mary's song. These are comparisons on foreshadowings of what's to come for the New Testament and stuff like that. Any questions? We got through it. Next week we'll go to 2 Samuel